What is going on, GBA? I am the Confusion, and welcome back to the final episode of the weekly recap for Season 7 of the GBA. I could not be more excited to finish this off with you guys, but of course, as you all already know, I am not alone. I am here with my dear friend Spastic.
It's over.
It's so sad.
But the season is not over, ladies and gentlemen. This is just round one of the playoffs, the quarterfinals, as it were. And we have 4 very fantastic games to talk about.
Yeah, we have obviously 8 of the best battlers from this season up against each other for 4 fantastic games. So, like we said last time, we are going to have me and Spastic here with you guys for the weekly recap for the first round of the playoffs. The next 2 rounds of the playoffs will be commentated by Burke and myself. But for right now, obviously, we don't have the league leaders because that is finished off in the regular season. Same with the conference standings. If you want to know what the playoffs are looking like, you can go look at the playoff pictures that are on the channel. But for right now, we are going to cover the games. So, looking at the first game of round 1 of the playoffs for our Season 7, we have the San Francisco Arcanners up against the Florida Gators. George is bringing his Mew, Garchomp, Mismagius, Mienshao, Registeel, and Suicune, and Gator is bringing his Latios, Mamoswine, Heatran, Hawlucha, Galvantula, and the Doublade. Now, this was a really interesting matchup. Looking at it from both perspectives, you have Mons that seem like they're going to do really well in the matchups. For example, the Latios, a really cool set, something Gator clearly saved for the playoffs. He brought a Z Safeguard set, which not only protects his Latios from any kind of status, something that might come off of the Suicune or the Registeel in terms of Scald Burns or a Thunder Wave, it'll protect it from that, but not only will it do that, it'll boost its speed by 1. A +1 Latios will actually outspeed the Scarf Garchomp on the other side of the field and can put in a lot of work with Calm Mind. So that is something that's going in favor for Gator. But looking at the George's side, he also has some really cool tech. The Mienshao obviously really strong, especially with Swords Dance and Drain Punch and Knockoff. It can put in a lot of work against Gator's team. Garchomp being Scarfed standard, but does really well in this matchup, especially with Gravity on the Registeel. Gravity allowing Garchomp to Earthquake the Latios and the Hawlucha, 2 Pokemon that normally don't get affected, but in this scenario with Gravity, they will get affected by the Earthquake, and spamming Earthquake on Garchomp can be detrimental towards the late game. So let's just jump into the actual game itself. First turn, you do have the Mamoswine up against the Registeel. Registeel is able to get up the rocks, thanks to the Shuka Berry, although the Mamoswine does not go for the Earthquake. It does go for the knockoff, gets rid of the Shuka Berry, and in general, Gator does have a very threatening Sash Mamoswine up against the field. Obviously, the Registeel got up the rocks, but no longer has its Shuka Berry, so it's going to take a lot of damage from the Earthquake, and George is not going to allow that to happen, so he is going to switch into his Mew. His Mew is going to take a lot of damage from the Earthquake, plus the knockoff, and although Mew is carrying Scald, it does not get the burn. Definitely not the first time it's going to happen this game, but hey, Scald actually has a higher chance to not get the burn, so I would not call it hacks. But what happens is the Scald crit on the Heatran is going to be huge. Basically what happens is the Suicune is going to come in and kill the Mamoswine after the Mew is really pressured, which of course is going to help out his Hawlucha. Gator's Hawlucha does not like that Mew because of how bulky it is, and carrying Scald can really hurt it, especially if it gets burned. But because that Mew is weakened up until I think around 10-15%, it's really not going to be able to match up well against the Hawlucha. So that thing being low is really nice for Gator. But unfortunately, the Suicune is able to come in, kill the Mamoswine. That's not the unfortunate part. The unfortunate part is Scald getting a critical hit on the Heatran. Now, the Heatran actually was a Spadef set, so it could have taken 2 Scalds and set up the rocks. But unfortunately, that does not happen. A critical hit occurs, and the Heatran is going to go down to the Suicune Scald. So we will soon see that those Stealth Rocks are actually going to come in handy for Gator, even though he cannot get them up. As you see, Georgia's team, none of the Mons are super weak to rocks. Actually, none of them are weak to rocks. But it is going to come into play because the Suicune later on is weakened a lot. And by the Doublade, a +2 Shadow Sneak could have taken it out if the rocks were up. So That is obviously annoying, but again, even though that Shadow Sneak couldn't kill, the Suicune did get off a Scald but did not get a burn. So really all that happened is that the Blade took a little bit of extra damage. In the end, it's not going to end up matter, so George is fine in that case. I would not call that hack something that changed the game for Gator, but definitely is unfortunate that that did happen. Something George is afraid of is the webs, of course, and he does suspect that that Galvantula is scarfed, so what he does is he switches into his Mew from his Suicune, predicting these scarfed webs. If he switches into the Mew and does not take damage, scarfed webs go up, and the Mew can defog them as the Galvantula is forced to switch, because of course it's scarfed. But that Galvantula is not scarfed and just goes for the Thunderbolt on the Mew, and although that does lose George his Mew, it does save him from Sticky Web. So although Sticky Webs were not on Gator's plan, it did scare George for the time being. Obviously, that is out of the way now. The fact that he went for the Thunderbolt and not for the webs leads George to assume that webs are not going to be an issue, although it would have been with the Scarfed Garchomp. Later on, Scarf Chomp is able to get a kill on the Galvantula. Hawlucha comes in, takes a knockoff from that Mienshao. Does take a decent amount of damage, obviously, due to that Mienshao having that strong Life Orb. Hawlucha really couldn't do much, even if Gator went for the Swords Dance, because the Mienshao had Feint. Feint is a priority move, and George goes for it, just assuming that a +2 in speed, the Unburden, is going to allow that Hawlucha to just knock out the Mienshao, which of course it does. Mienshao is able to get that Feint off, but the thing is, that Feint was not a 2-hit KO. So what went through my mind is, if Gator did go for the Swords Dance, he would have actually been able to get to +2, knock out the Mienshao, and be really well off from there. Although after further inspection, it really did not matter too much. First of all, Gator predicted a high jump kick, and that literally could have killed that Hawlucha, even though it was a resisted hit. Especially due to Reckless and the Life Orb. Even though it was not a Reckless hit, it was Regenerator, it still would have killed. So that was dangerous for Gator. But not only that, we saw that high jump kick did less than half to the Garchomp, the Scarf Garchomp. So a +2 high jump kick actually would not have knocked out the Garchomp. So that actually went really, really well for George. Even if Gator did go for the +2, it did not matter in the end. George was completely fine. We do see that Z Safeguard go off, which of course was very smart, but Gravity from that Registeel does allow it to go for the Earthquake, get some really good damage, and as the Latios sets up its first Calm Mind, the Registeel just goes boom and explodes. Latios does live, which leads Gator to believe that he pretty much has this game in, because Latios is carrying Roost, and because his only attack is Dragon Pulse, which is totally fine, because George does not bring his Togekiss. So Gator does look like he has it, but of course, George brings out the hidden tech, Shadow Sneak Mismagius, which I didn't even know Mismagius got, but apparently Mismagius gets Shadow Sneak, took it to his advantage, killed off the Latios, which could have been detrimental to George's team, and from there cleans up with the Garchomp. So what did you think of the first game of playoffs, Spastic?
There was a lot of interesting tech, like you said. Mismagius especially, because it only has a base 60 physical attack. So a lot of people aren't expecting physical moves on it, which, I mean, isn't bad. Or is it 60 or 65? Anyway, it's much lower for its physical attack. But that one little surprise tech can come in clutch. The Z Safeguard, I was actually happy to see that go off. It actually did, it would have done a lot more work, but George did prep for a lot of contingencies, but I mean, Z Safeguard isn't something that you prep for. That's not something you hear of. Gator making really good use of Latios as his Z captain this season, and unfortunately, he did lose this game, but props to George for pulling off what looked like a surefire loss, but coming out with a 1-0, Scarf Chomp coming in for the kill, coming in for this nice sweep, cleaning up at the end. And Scarf Mons coming in to sweep up is also the name of the game for this next matchup. We have the Tampa Bay Luxrays and the Philadelphia Scizors. Mono bringing Miltank, Mantine, Florges, Greninja, Bisharp, and Jirachi, while Chimpact brought Kyurem Black, Thunderous Incarnate, Dugtrio, Volcanion, Sovali, and Forretress. Now, turn 1, right off the bat, Thunderous Incarnate lives an Ice Beam from Greninja thanks to the Yashi Berry, and kills it with a Volt Switch instantly. So there's a huge, fast offensive presence gone from Mono's side. Jirachi quickly gets rocks up, and unfortunately, Chimpact only has one hazard remover. He has Fortress, and that's pretty much his main concern is to get rocks off the field so that Kieran Black and Thunderous Incarnate don't have to deal with it, and Volcanion don't have to deal with it. So Florges and Kieran Black end up trading huge damage. The Scarf Florges firing off a Moonblast, outspeeding the Kieran Black, which then hits Florges with an Iron Head. Both take incredible damage, and Chimpact knows, okay, that thing is Scarf, I need to get out of here. Florges goes off for another Moonblast, hits the Silvally, which is carrying the Poison Memory. So he has a good strong Poison type on his team. But the Scarf Florges taking him completely by surprise. Fortress comes out, spins away rocks like he wanted it. Jirachi almost immediately puts them back up after dealing a very substantial Fire Punch to the Fortress, knocking it down to about half. And then when Jirachi is knocked down to low damage, it fires off a Healing Wish into Florges, getting it back up to full health after taking that substantial damage from Kieran. Mantine comes in against Fortress again. Mantine comes in against Fortress and fires off a Scald, just hoping to get some residual damage, maybe a burn or so, but he gets a crit and knocks out the Fortress with the Scald, which is detrimental to Chimpact as that is his only removal and it is now gone. Volcanion and Kieran will both suffer greatly from this. The next few plays go really quickly. Volcanion goes down to a Moonblast from Florges. Dugtrio then dies to Bisharp's Iron Head, which then dies to Kieran Black's Earth Power, and then Kieran Black, Silvally Poison, and Thunderous Incarnate all go down to Scarf Florges Moonblast. So both coaches really playing well, but Mono playing, even though the momentum was in Chimpact's favor at first, he played around, got the momentum back in his favor, and set it up to where Florges comes in with a Scarf and just Moonblasts all over Chimpact. So really good playing by both coaches. Really great for Mono, managing to turn around that early momentum deficit. But Chimpact putting up a good fight, especially with the Silvally Poison putting in some good tech. We're getting to see how Silvally worked in this generation. Dugtrio being forced, Chimpact forced to sacrifice Dugtrio really hurt, as he could have put in a lot of work against the Jirachi and the Bisharp. But unfortunately, a couple of sacks had to be made from both coaches. But overall, really great. What did you think?
I have to say this was really an interesting matchup, especially since, like you said, Silvally, a new Pokemon that is seen to be doing better than most Gen 7 Mons, in my opinion. I think Silvally has a lot of potential, and what was interesting is, first of all, props to the Scarf Florges. I mean, when you think about it, it does have base 75 speed, and base 112 special attack is obviously nothing to scoff at. So, I mean, scarfing that thing is not the worst idea. Most people don't do it just because, although Fairy is very, very spammable, it does not really get anything to hit Steel types. It gets Energy Ball and stuff of that nature. So unless you want to run a Hidden Power, it's very hard to run Scarfed Florges. Most is common, obviously, the bulky sets and the Calm Mind sets. But seeing a Scarfed one is very interesting, not only because it's uncommon, but because it doesn't seem to have had the best matchup versus Chimpact. Clearly it did, but when you look at it on paper, mons like Fortress, a Silvally, Poison, and a Volcanion all eat hits from Florges. Like, Florges does not have coverage, but it was the way Monotui was able to play around those mons, weaken them, take advantage of Healing Wish Jirachi. That was what made this game. That's what allowed a Scarfed Florges to be so successful. It is not the Florges itself, but the player. We already know how great Monotui is, and matter of fact, we already know how great Chimpact is. The way he played the game was also really, really good. He played to his best potential, but once that crit on the Fortress happened, rocks were up to stay, and that was a huge detriment to Chimpact's team. So it was an unfortunate loss. We are going to see Monotui advance and Chimpact kind of sit down, but he did make it to playoffs. He put up an amazing fight, especially with some new mons, some new buffs in Dugtrio. So I think it was really good games. But speaking about the rocks, the next game we're going to go into is the San Jose Sharpedos up against the San Diego Chimp Chargers. We have two sand teams over here. So Tom is bringing Celesteela, his Thunderous T, Nidoqueen, Zelf, his Zygarde, Dog, Darmanitan, and Envy is bringing Dragonite, Cresselia, Empoleon, Alolan Muck, Virizion, and a Lando T. Now, right off the bat, we do have the two Therian Genies up against each other. Thundry T versus Lando T. Now, right off the bat, the Lando is going to switch out. Envy is worried initially about a Scarfed Thundy, and that could be really bad, because if it was Scarfed in HP Ice, is not something that Envy wants to see his Lando be taking. So he is just going to switch into that Muck. It is Assault Vest. It is a safe switch for him. What Tom is going to do is click Knockoff on that Muck, get rid of the Assault Vest, and Volt Switch out. Tom's perspective on this was he was afraid of getting Pursuit Trap, so he did Volt Switch out and go into the Zygarde, thinking that it was a very safe switch, he could get up a sub right after, but that's not what happened. Envy does go for the Knockoff and is able to successfully do a lot of damage to that Zygarde, so that is going to be really annoying for Tom. It did have a lot of bulk investment, but unfortunately it does take a ton of damage. What Tom is going to do is he's still going to go for that sub, but it is going to be broken. So we do have a lot of back and forth over there. But what happens is after that, Virizion comes in, takes, misses the toxic obviously. The Zygarde misses the toxic on the Virizion. Not a big deal. Virizion does have that Lumberry, but missing it is annoying because the Darmanitan did have Will-O-Wisp. And that could have been a safer play later on in the game instead of clicking Flare Blitz in case that the Dragonite did want to come in. But going back to the move we're talking about is when the Virizion clicks Leaf Blade and breaks a substitute on the Zygarde. Tom is thinking he's just going to save his Zygarde a little bit. He's going to switch into that Celesteela. Envy making a solid prediction and going for the close combat instead of the Leaf Blade, and does a pretty good amount of damage to that Celesteela. Allows Envy to gauge the damage and the type of Celesteela that Tom is bringing, because like we said, the new Mons have been very interesting. Celesteela is a Mon that can be very, very offensive and very, very defensive. It is one of the most versatile Mons that we have seen in the format, and it has shown that it can be really good. This is a more defensive Celesteela, and it's running something like Leech Seed, which is going to be really annoying, because Celesteela with Leech Seed is going to whittle Mons like Empoleon down, although Empoleon is able to get up those rocks, and those rocks are crucial. Tom, obviously, this whole season has not grabbed great hazard removal. In this game, he didn't even bring it, and those rocks are going to be a huge detriment, huge, obviously, weakness to the Darmanitan and the Thundy T. It's going to whittle those Mons down, and Thunder is actually getting poisoned on the Cresselia. I'm going to talk about that play because I kind of disagreed with it, so let me just go through what happens. The Cresselia is able to get up a sub up, and Tom switches into his Zelf. His Zelf is Scarfed, it has U-turn, easily break those subs on the Cresselia. So he does U-turn with his Zelf, breaks the sub, and that's fine. But the thing is, Tom should have gone into his Celesteela. Celesteela could have broken subs with Heavy Slam because it would have no longer been intimidated, and it could not have gotten Toxic. So Celesteela was definitely the play there, but instead he goes into the Thundy. Huge misplay. It not only does it cause Thundy to take an extra round of rocks damage, but the Toxic is going to whittle that Mon down, and along with the rocks, even though it had that weird berry, I can't remember, that gave it 50% in health once it was below 50%, that's not going to make a big difference. Once the Darmanitan is lured in, Envy does lure in that Darmanitan and gets a kill on the Empoleon, so that was really nice to see on Tom's part, but all that does is allow Envy to bring in his Dragonite. Once that Dragonite is in, it could set up a Dragon Dance, and with Fire Punch, hits the Celesteela so hard. Brings it down to around 6%, which is huge damage on such a fat Mon. Celesteela is, however, able to get off a Heavy Slam. Breaking that multi-scale is going to be huge, but after that, Celesteela is down, and now Cresselia is going to be a big, big issue. Alolan Muck is an issue, Virizion is an issue, Lando T is an issue. Celesteela is definitely holding back a lot of Mons, and now can no longer do so. So it's going to be really hard for Tom to kind of pull this back, especially with all those hazards up. What's going to happen next is the Azelf is going to come in. Because it is Scarfed, it outspeeds a +1 Dragonite. Goes for the Ice Punch as Envy brings in his Alolan Muck, because he knows that Extreme Speed actually won't kill the Azelf just yet. So he needs that thing to take a little bit more damage. The Alolan Muck comes in, takes the Ice Punch, and the Ice Punch freezes. Luckily, we haven't seen too much freeze hacks this season, something we haven't mentioned, but yeah, not too many freeze hacks. In the playoffs, we do see a little bit of freeze hacks. The Alolan Monk getting frozen from Azelf's Ice Punch, and that is going to cause the Alolan Monk to die to the Ice Punches after a few consecutive ones. So that is going to be really unfortunate, but just later on, MV is able to learn the Darmanitan again, and after some chip on the Azelf, a +1 Dragonite with extreme speed, and a Z Outrage is going to completely annihilate the walls such as Nidoqueen and faster mons such as Azelf. So that is going to be the game. What did you think of it, Spastic?
Cresselia. I will say it again, it's such an annoying defensive mon. But Alolan Muck, we were talking about Gen 7 mons with Silvally and Celesteela. Alolan Muck and Celesteela both coming in with Gen 7 as fantastic defensive and offensive threats. Alolan Muck, in my opinion, far outclasses regular Muck, which shouldn't be slept on. But Alolan Muck being able to fire off stab knockoffs, being able to soak defensive hits for days, and then Celesteela, with its near-even defenses and its decently powerful special offense and physical offense, being able to fire off really strong heavy slams given how heavy that thing is, 1-ton waifu. Zydoge, another Gen 7 mon, coming out, making a fantastic presence. One of Tom's main offensive staples, really, sitting alongside Thunder's Therian. But yeah, both Genies coming out, and Lando not doing a whole lot this game, but in fairness, it didn't really need to, because Dragonite came in, set up a DD, went to town, and just proceeded to wreck Tom's team from there. But GD to both coaches. Good game to Tom for making an appearance in the playoffs. But the next game has a very similar trend with a Dragon DDing and going to town. We are of course talking about the San Francisco Giants versus the New Orleans Pelipers. Geo bringing Salamence, Tapu Fini, Umbreon, Remix, Arcanine, and Ditto. And John brought Infernape, Jolteon, Skarmory, Goodra, Uxie, and Scolipede. Now right off the bat, Jolteon goes for the Volt Switch on Tapu Fini, but Geo switches into Ditto. It transforms into Jolteon, absorbs the Volt absorbs the Volt Switch. So right there, John's losing some momentum as Jolteon is Specs, so he has to hard switch, which gives Geo a free chance to Volt Switch on his own, get his own momentum back. John does bring out Skarmory and get the spikes up, which is very nice. But then a really interesting play that is ultimately inconsequential, but it was an interesting play nonetheless. Geo brings out Heliolisk, and while the Misty Terrain is still up, he goes for Glare, which completely useless as the mist is up and completely prevents it. But I mean, Geo slipped, he forgot, oops, oh well, it happens in the heat of the moment. Especially with some of the new tech like Mystic Terrain. Yeah, it was introduced in Gen 6, but it wasn't really used. But with Tapu Fini, it's an automatic setup. So Scolipede comes in, Geo switches out twice, first with the Arcanine and then into the Salamence, gets a double Intimidate off. So it can't deal a whole lot of damage, but it does manage to get a really nice Poison Jab on the Arcanine, bringing it to below half. As John goes for the Earthquake on the Arcanine, Geo makes the wide switch into Salamence. So good call on that 50-50. But then it is Infernape versus Heliolisk, and Heliolisk gets absolutely demolished by a Continental Crush on the switch. So rest in peace, Heliolisk. We might find it about 10,000 years after digging through that rubble. Ditto comes in as Infernape. John hard switches out as Infernape is not running U-turn. He is running 4 offensive coverage moves. Ditto Infernape gets a crit Flare Blitz on Uxie, which brings it down really low, but Uxie does manage to get up rocks. So now Geo has layers of spikes and rocks to deal with, which could be a problem, especially for the Salamence, the Arcanine, and just all of his mons in general not wanting to take hazards. Tapu Fini is his only hazard removal. Arcanine does go down to Jolteon's Specs Shadow Ball. Arcanine goes down to a Jolteon Specs Shadow Ball after Uxie gets a crit Psychic on it. But then Umbreon comes in, goes down to Infernape's Close Combat, and here's where the match really tipped in Geo's favor. Salamence is out on the field. It does get an Intimidate, and it does go for a Dragon Dance. John goes for the Stone Edge, and it misses. Salamence is not hit by the Stone Edge, so Gio gets a free second Dragon Dance. It does live the second hit, and then that's just game from there. Salamence just clicks Dragon Claw over and over and over. John has no fairy on that roster, nothing to be immune to the hit, and after 2 Dragon Dances, nothing could outspeed it. Jolteon was running specs, so it wasn't faster. Scolipede couldn't have even come in and gotten a protect speed boost. It was too weak anyhow. So Salamence Dragon Dancing twice. Nothing wants to sit in front of that after a while, especially when it's running Flyinium Z. Supersonic Sky Strikes, the Skarmory takes it out, and it's just downhill from there. So really great prep for both coaches. Gio really making really good use of Ditto and Arcanine. I feel like Arcanine did more for Gio this season than Entei did in seasons 5 and 6. But that's just my humble opinion. That has nothing to do with the fact that I made that bold prediction at the beginning of the season. But we're ignoring that part for the moment. What do you think, Confusion?
Yeah, I would have to say, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of controversy with that Stone Edge miss, but in my opinion, I think the real reason John could not pull back in the game is because the Scolipede did not have Protect. I mean, if it had Protect, there could have been a different, situation happening. Obviously, Salamence did have Intimidate, so the Stone Edge wasn't doing like that much, but, there's a lot you can go into when it comes to that game, but when it comes down to it, Gio did play really, really well, and as well John played. John played very well when it came to that match. He really put his best foot forward and tried his best, especially when it came to prep. But when it did come to prep, I think he lacked a little bit when it came to not having Protect on Scolipede. It could have really come in handy. But regardless of that fact, I also want to say, hey, it was not a stall fest. So congrats, regardless, that it was very nice to see no stall games. So I'm sure you guys are all very pumped about that. But yeah, we had really good games, actually. 3 of our games were 3-0s, and 1 of our games were 1-0s. So all pretty close games, pretty good games. You could say there was a bit of hacks within all of them, but hey, hacks is always going to be a part of the game, so please don't get salty. We have great matches coming up. If you want to look at the playoff picture happening later on this week, make sure you guys check that out and see what the games are going to look like next week. But other than that, I would like to say thank you guys for being amazing with the weekly recap. It has been a blast having you guys, and I will see you guys next week, but Spastic might not, so Spastic, please give us your last words.
Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an honor. I wish you all the best. I wish all the best for the coaches, and for the final time of Season 7. My name is Ospastic1. Aloha.
Peace, guys. That was very dramatic.